Imagine a civilization that thrived thousands of years before our own, leaving behind colossal pyramids and intricate hieroglyphs. Imagine them wielding technologies that even our modern minds struggle to grasp. Ancient Egypt, a cradle of wonder and mystery, continues to baffle scientists with its seemingly impossible feats. From perfectly aligned structures defying gravitational logic to medical practices that predate modern understanding, the Egyptians possessed knowledge that seems to defy the boundaries of time. From the construction of their colossal pyramids to the secrets locked within their hieroglyphs to century-old calendars, each find on our list promises to leave you amazed. So buckle up and get ready to see the top 10 oldest ancient Egyptian technologies that scientists still can't explain, because the number 1 spot on our countdown promises to blow your mind. Number 10. How did millions of tons get stacked so perfectly? One of the most interesting things about old engineering is how the Egyptian pyramids, especially the Great Pyramid of Giza, were built. Researchers have been trying to figure out how the ancient Egyptians built these huge buildings for hundreds of years, but they still don't fully understand them. The sheer size and accuracy with which the pyramids were built are amazing. For example, the Great Pyramid is made up of about 2.3 million limestone blocks, some of which weigh up to 80 tons, and are organized very precisely to make a base that is almost square. The stones were taken from nearby quarries, like the Tura limestone mines on the east bank of the Nile, and moved to the spot where the pyramid was being built. This would have needed a huge amount of work and careful planning of logistics. One of the biggest secrets about how the pyramids were built is how the ancient Egyptians were able to line up and place the huge stone blocks so precisely. The stones were cut and put together with such accuracy that there are tiny gaps that are hardly noticeable to the naked eye. This shows a level of engineering and skill that is hard to understand given the tools and technology that were available at the time. A lot of different ideas have been put forward to explain how the ancient Egyptians might have done this. Some people suggest using simple tools like copper chisels, wooden sledges, and steps to cut the stones, move them, and set them down. Others suggest more complex methods like using ramps, handles, counterweights, or even water to lower friction while transporting. But each of these ideas has problems and things that it can't explain. For instance, building a ramp big enough to reach the top of the tower would have needed a lot more work and materials, which made it seem like it might not be possible. In the same way, people are still not sure how to move and place the huge stone blocks, especially when they are very high up. Number 9. The mysterious transformation of ancient stone. The technical skills used to build obelisks in ancient Egypt are still amazing and continue to fascinate scholars and experts. In ancient Egypt, obelisks, which are huge towers made of a single block of rock, were built as signs of power and religious reverence. People are still interested in and arguing about the exact methods the ancient Egyptians used to dig, cut, move, and build these huge buildings. It was very hard to find the huge blocks of stone that were needed for obelisks. The ancient Egyptians probably used a mix of chisels, beating stones and wooden tools to get the granite out of the mines. But no one knows for sure how they were able to cut and shape such hard stones, especially granite, without using metal tools. Some ideas say that beating stones were used to make the first holes in the rock, which were then filled with wooden pieces that had been soaked in water to make the stone grow and break. This process would have needed a lot of work and had to be carefully planned and carried out. After being mined, the rough-cut column would have been moved from the quarry to where it was supposed to go. It's an amazing feat of logistics that these huge stones, which weigh several hundred tons each, were moved over long distances. Some ideas say that sledges could be used to make moving easier by reducing friction. These sledges could be oiled with water or animal fat. Others say that wooden wheels or tracks could be used to make moving things easier. But the exact ways the ancient Egyptians moved such heavy loads over different surfaces, like desert sands and riverbanks, are still not fully known. Other problems came up when they had to carve and shape the obelisk. The ancient Egyptians were very good at making things, but it's not completely clear how they made the exact geometric forms and complicated Arabic writings on obelisks. Pinch stones, chisels, and abrasives made from sand and water are thought to have been used to make the granite into its finished shape. These tools would have been used to carefully cut hieroglyphs and other designs into the surface, showing how skilled and accurate ancient Egyptian craftsmen were. Lastly, putting the column up where it was supposed to go took careful planning and creative engineering. This meant that the obelisk had to be moved from a horizontal to an upright position without hurting the stone or the people working on it. Many ideas have been put forward for how to do this, including using ramps, levers, and counterweights. However, no one knows for sure what the ancient Egyptians did. Number 8. Why ancient Egyptians wrote like a puzzle. The ancient Egyptians used an official writing system called hieroglyphs, which was made up of both logographic and phonetic symbols. A lot of work has been made in understanding this very complicated language, but modern experts are still not sure what some of the symbols and subtleties mean. Many things were written in hieroglyphics, such as religious books, history markings, governmental papers, and carvings on monuments. The writing was very picture-based, with each picture standing for a word, idea, or sound. There were also different ways to write hieroglyphs, such as from left to right to left, or top to bottom, based on the situation. One problem with understanding hieroglyphs is that they use so many symbols, about 700 different ones. There are still some signs whose meanings are not clear, even though many patterns have been found and their meanings known. And this is partly because the language has changed over thousands of years, making some marks look and mean different things at different times. Ideograms were also used a lot in Egyptian writing. An ideogram is a symbol that stands for an idea or thought instead of a specific word or sound. When you look at these ideograms, they might mean different things based on the words or images around them. To figure out what these ideograms mean, you need to know a lot about Egyptian religion, society, and symbols. Determinatives, which are symbols added to make the meaning of a word clearer or to put it in a larger semantic context, are another thing that makes Egyptian writing more difficult. Determinatives don't help with phonetics, but they can help you figure out what words in old Egyptian texts mean by showing you what they mean in context. Even with these problems, a lot of success has been made in understanding hieroglyphics, thanks to the work of experts like Jean-François Champollion, who famously translated the Rosetta Stone in the early 1800s. The Rosetta Stone, which had writing in both Greek and hieroglyphics, was one of the most important pieces of evidence that helped scientists figure out how ancient Egyptians wrote. Number 7. The surprisingly advanced world of ancient Egyptian healers. Ancient Egypt was a society that made great strides in many areas, including health. But some of their medical practices, especially those that had to do with surgery, still stump experts today. One of the most interesting things about ancient Egyptian medicine is trepanation, which involves making holes in the head. Archaeological evidence shows that trepanation was done for many reasons, such as to treat head injuries, ease the pain of swelling or bleeding, and maybe even for religious or spiritual reasons. The ancient Egyptians were not the only people who did trepanation, but not much is known about how much they did it or what methods they used. Some scholars and scientists still don't agree on what tools and methods were used in ancient Egyptian surgery. Some medical tools, like scalpels and tweezers, have been found in ancient digs. However, there isn't a lot of information about how to sterilize and numb the area. It's not clear how ancient Egyptian doctors dealt with pain and avoided infections during surgery, since they didn't have a lot of medical knowledge or tools at the time. Aside from that, no one knows for sure if the old Egyptian medical treatments, such as plant medicines and magical spells, worked or not. Others may have been based on religion or cultural views rather than real scientific proof, even though some treatments may have really helped people. Even with these questions, it is clear that ancient Egyptian medicine was very advanced for its time. Specialized doctors, who were called healers of the god, show that ancient Egyptians had a certain amount of medical knowledge and skill. The Edwin Smith Papyrus, which is thought to be from around 1600 BC, has detailed medical texts that describe surgery methods and anatomy findings. These texts are very helpful for learning about ancient Egyptian medicine. Number 6. The ancient Egyptians' shocking ritual to cheat the grave. Mummification was a very complicated and ritualized process that was used to keep the body alive for the future, which was a key idea in ancient Egyptian religion. Researchers still don't fully understand how mummification works, even though they have a good idea of how it works in general. In the beginning of the mummification process, parts like the brain, liver, lungs, and intestines were usually taken out and kept separate in canopic jars. After the body was washed and dry, it was treated with different chemicals to stop it from breaking down. Natron, a naturally occurring mix of sodium carbonate and sodium bicarbonate that dries out tissues by drawing water out of them, was one of the most popular chemicals used. Once the body was completely dry, it was often packed with things like sawdust or cloth to help it keep its shape. After that, the body was covered in layers of cloth wraps, which sometimes had amulets and charms on them to protect them in the future. The mummy was then put in a gilded box or sarcophagus and buried in a tomb with other grave goods and gifts. The basic steps of mummification are known to us, but there are still questions about the exact methods used and the ingredients in the fluids used to preserve the body. For instance, we still don't fully understand what the adhesive substances used to seal the packages are made of or how they are put on. What part rituals and religious views played in the mummification process is still being studied, including spells and incantations that priests said while the bodies were being embalmed. Even though these questions are still open, the fact that so many well-preserved mummies have been found, some of which are thousands of years old, shows that Egyptian mummification worked. Number 5. Flood or feast, the ancient Egyptians' risky gamble with water. The Nile River was very important to the survival and growth of Egyptian society. It provided water for farming, shipping, and irrigation. In order to survive in an otherwise dry environment, the ancient Egyptians came up with complex ways to use the river's power and control its yearly rains. One of the most interesting things about how the ancient Egyptians managed water was their vast system of irrigation. They built networks of waterways, dikes, and lakes to move water from the Nile to farms. This made sure that crops always had enough water throughout the year. These watering systems were carefully planned and kept up. Local leaders were in charge of making sure that water got to the right places based on their needs. The ancient Egyptians also came up with new ways to stop flooding. They built flood walls and embankments to keep the Nile from flooding every year. This stopped the damage from flooding and let the silt's nutrients feed the land. They were able to get the most out of farming and reduce the risk of crop failure by carefully planning when and how much it rained. The ancient Egyptians also knew a lot about how to get water from the ground. They dug wells and built cisterns to get to deep water sources, especially in places where there wasn't much open water. These wells were very important for getting water for drinking, farming, and household needs, especially when the Nile wasn't flooding as much. Overall, the way that ancient Egyptians managed their water was very important to their survival and wealth. The ancient Egyptians were able to keep a large population alive and a thriving farming economy by using the power of the Nile River and creating complex systems for irrigation, flood control, and groundwater extraction. They did this in one of the harshest conditions on Earth. Number 4. Fractions, equations, and the Nile. Ancient Egypt is known for making great strides in many areas, including math. Not only did their math skills help them in real life, but math was also strongly connected to their religious beliefs, building projects, and daily lives. The ancient Egyptians learned a lot about math and used it in many areas of their society. One of the most interesting things about ancient Egyptian math is how they used geometry in building and architecture. Buildings like the pyramids of Giza with its perfect symmetry and measurements, reveals that they knew a lot about geometry. The layout of buildings and tombs also shows that they were carefully planned with math. The ancient Egyptians also came up with a way to measure things that was based on useful units that came from natural events. Ancient Egyptians often used the cubit as a measure of length. It was based on the length of the wrist from the elbow to the tip of the middle finger. This standard unit of measurement made it possible to build buildings and structures with a high level of accuracy. The Egyptians made important advances to numbers and mathematics, as well as geometry and measuring, in order to make their methods for adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing work well. They often used Egyptian symbols to show numbers. The Rhine mathematical papyrus, which was written around 1550 BC, has a lot of math questions and their answers. It shows us a lot about how the Egyptians did math back then. The Egyptians were also very good at using fractions, measures, and equations to solve real-world problems. For example, the way they split up units of measurement and shared resources like food and things shows that they knew how to use fractions. The Moscow Mathematical Papyrus is another ancient Egyptian mathematical work that has examples of fraction and equation problems that show how smart the Egyptians were at math. Number 3. Ancient Egyptians. The original beauty influences. Making cosmetics in ancient Egypt was a very complex and important part of their daily lives. It showed not only how they liked to look, but also their religious and cultural views. A lot of value was placed on personal hygiene and beauty routines by the ancient Egyptians. Cosmetics were used for both practical and symbolic reasons. Coal, a black powder made from finely ground galena, also known as lead sulfide or other minerals, was one of the most famous beauty items that the Egyptians used. Coal was put in intricate designs around the eyes to make them look better and protect them from the sun's sharp glare. Coal was also useful because it could be used as eyeliner to keep your eyes from getting infections and as a bug spray to keep flies and other pests away. Native plants like flowers, herbs, spices, and oils were used by the ancient Egyptians to make perfumes and ointments in addition to coal. People used these fragrant mixtures not only because they smelled good, but also because they thought they had healing and spiritual powers. People used perfumes to decorate their bodies and hide bad smells in hot climates. They put perfumes on their skin, hair, and clothes. They were also given to the gods as gifts and used in holy ceremonies. In ancient Egypt, making makeup was a specialized craft that was done by skilled workers who often did their jobs in workshops connected to temples or royal houses. These skilled workers carefully chose, handled, and mixed raw materials to make high-quality cosmetics that were exactly what their customers wanted. The recipes and methods for making makeup were closely guarded secrets that were passed down from generation to generation. This added to the mystery surrounding Egyptian beauty practices. One of the most interesting things about ancient Egyptian cosmetics is that they used natural ingredients that had medicinal properties. Some ingredients like aloe vera, myrrh, and frankincense were valued for their ability to heal and soothe the skin. Other ingredients like henna and indigo were used to color hair and nails. The ancient Egyptians also learned how to get essential oils from plants. These oils were used to make perfumes, massage oils, and preparations for burial. Number 2. The mystery of Egyptian blue. Ancient Egypt was one of the first places in the world to make glass, a material that would change the way people lived forever. Unfortunately, the exact methods the ancient Egyptians used to make glass are still a bit of a secret. It is clear that they were very good at making glass items of different colors and sizes, which shows that they knew a lot about the material and how it worked. The bright blue dye, called Egyptian blue, is one of the most famous things that the ancient Egyptians made from glass. Researchers have been interested in this pigment for hundreds of years because of its beautiful color and long life. It is used a lot in art and decoration. Even though the main parts of Egyptian blue have been found to be sand, rock, and copper, no one really knows how it was made. It is thought that the raw materials were mixed together and cooked in a furnace. However, the exact temperatures and methods needed to get the color and consistency that were wanted are still being studied. Egyptians made a lot of different kinds of glass containers, beads, and decorations, in addition to Egyptian blue. There is a lot of skill and artistic expression in these items, which suggests that making glass was a big business in ancient Egypt. Blowing, shaping, and cutting were some of the methods used to make and decorate glass items, showing that the artist was skilled at many types of glassworking. One problem with learning how the ancient Egyptians made glass is that there isn't a lot of physical proof. Objects made of glass are more likely to break than clay or metal items. This means that they are less likely to be whole after thousands of years. Still, digging at places like Amarna and Tel El Amarna has taught us a lot about how ancient Egyptians made glass. Kilns, furnaces, and workshop remains have shown us how the industry worked and what tools were used. Number 1, 5 extra days that changed everything. It is thought that the old Egyptian calendar system was one of the first calendars ever made. It was very important for planning many things in Egyptian society, such as religious events, farming, and running the government. Researchers are still interested in a few parts of the calendar, even though they understand how it works in general. The Egyptian calendar had 12 months, and each month was about 30 days long. There were 360 days in a year. There were 3 seasons during these months: flooding, growth, and harvest. The Egyptians also added 5 extra days at the end of the year. These were called epigomenal days, and they made the total number of days 365, which is very close to the length of a solar year. One interesting thing about the Egyptian calendar was that it didn't intercalate, which means that it didn't add extra days or months to match the solar year. Over time, this caused the Egyptian calendar to become less and less in sync with the seasons. This meant that people had to rely on observation to figure out when to do farming tasks like filling the Nile. The Egyptian calendar was based on the sun and the moon, and the new moon marked the start of each month. Unlike purely lunar calendars, which are made up of 12 lunar months that add up to about 354 days, the Egyptian calendar also had a solar component to keep it in sync with the growing seasons. Researchers have come up with a number of ideas about how the ancient Egyptians might have figured out how to balance the lunar and solar cycles. These ideas include observing the stars and adding extra months every so often. But the exact processes are still unknown, and experts are still arguing about how the Egyptians dealt with the differences between their schedule and the solar year. Even though it wasn't very accurate over long periods of time, the Egyptian calendar system lasted for thousands of years and had a big impact on later Mediterranean societies. Some parts of the Egyptian calendar, like the idea of the extra 5 days and dividing the year into 12 months, can be seen in other calendar systems that came after, like the Roman calendar and the Gregorian calendar we use today. The ancient Egyptians continue to surprise us with their ingenuity and leave us with more questions than answers. Perhaps the greatest mystery of all is not how they created all these things, but why. What drove them to create such lasting cultural touchpoints and leave behind such a rich and complex legacy? These oldest ancient Egyptian technologies are the most amazing we have found so far, and we hope we can keep adding to the list in the future.